Welcome to the Agent of Wealth podcast with Marc Bautis from Bautis Financial. In this podcast, Marc helps guide you towards financial freedom, ensure you never run out of money, and create a balance in life that prioritizes what is most important to you. Join us for this journey as Marc draws from years of expertise and guest experts to solve the multiple wealth building challenges involved in your financial life.
Welcome back to the Agent of Wealth. This is your host, Marc Bautis. Today I'm joined by a special guest, Dr. Michael Jaquith. Dr. Michael Jaquith is a PhD chemist who left the corporate world and now helps men everywhere discover how to get more of what they want and live the promise of abundant life. By combining analytical science, psychology, and the teachings of faith, Michael helps men who feel stuck, confused, and powerless to unlock those chains and find what they really want. Michael's married with 6 children and lives in rural northern Idaho. Michael, welcome to the show.
Marc, thank you so much for having me. It's a delight to be here.
All right, so I'm going to start off by sharing 2 statistics about divorce. The first, probably quite well known, but the second might surprise people out there. So number 1, approximately 40 to 50% of marriages in the U.S. end in divorce. So that's according to the American Psychological Association. And the second stat, in the United States, men file for divorce less often than women, with women initiating nearly 70% of the divorces in the country. So we've covered divorce on this podcast before, but we've never approached the topic specifically from the men's point of view. I'm looking forward to it. That's why you're here, Michael. So welcome again.
Well, I'm so delighted to be here, and what a great opportunity to bring up what I think is a really critical problem going on in our society. 40% is a shockingly high number.
Yeah. So to start off, can you give us some background of what you do as a Catholic life coach for men and kind of what led you into that calling?
Absolutely. So I had a funny path here. So I have a PhD in chemistry. I spent almost 10 years doing corporate research, very high-end stuff. And what I really found was that I loved the most engaging with other people. And my favorite part of the day was just sitting down in the cafe, talking with various guys. What's going on in your life? Where can we help? And that was so fulfilling that it was through a process of prayer, process of trying to evaluate what's important in my life. I have 6 kids. I really wanted flexibility to spend time with the kids. And I decided to launch this entrepreneurial thing first as a side hustle. And it became something big. So what do? I get guys who are like, Michael, I'm pretty grumpy because I'm not showing up well in my marriage. Like my wife isn't happy with me, or maybe they're not happy how they're showing up at their work or with their own kids. And we sit down, we just very carefully work through the issues. And the key transition comes when the guy realizes he doesn't need the other person to change. He can change himself. And when we work on ourselves, that's a game changer. When we stop blaming other people for our problems and say, hey, the power to fix this is within me, that's a whole new ballgame.
We started off with saying 40% of marriages end in divorce. And a lot of times we'll look at after the divorce and what happens and how to fix things or how to get on. But it might make sense to kind of look at before that happens, what can be done. The hardest thing is to take that first step and really kind of say, okay, I need to make an improvement here. How do you get someone to come to that conclusion or realization that they need to make a change?
I think we need to really get really crystal clear on what the cost is of not making the change. Like right now, if I take the average guy and I say, hey, look, do you want to have double or maybe even triple the wealth 20 years from now? They'd say, yeah, that sounds cool. And if I said, hey, cool, do you want your children to have a meaningful relationship with you, to respect you into your old age and to really make a real contribution in their lives? You'd be like, yeah, I think I want that. And I'd be like, do you want to have a meaningful impact on your culture, in your community? You'd be like, yeah, that sounds good too. Sign me up. I say, cool, stay married. And when we get connected with the values and the meanings and the purposes behind this, it can give us the motivation to push through what is otherwise actually a really, really tough thing. I mean, marriage isn't just fun. I think, we have Hollywood, we have bad ideas going into marriage. It's somehow supposed to just be la-ti-da. We all get to enjoy each other's company, go out and have tea and wine and whatever. But marriage is a connection, a bond between 2 incredibly selfish people. That's just the reality of it. We're all very, very selfish. And so once you're in there, especially if you've got kids, the cost of divorce is so much higher than most guys are thinking when they're in the thick of it. And if you ever doubt that, find a guy who had kids who got divorced and ask them. Or find their kids and ask them. Because that cost is tremendous. And both financially, emotionally, metaphysically, in terms of relationships, all those costs just rack up. And that's where you've got to get if you want to do the hard work.
So what's the first step? Someone makes that decision that, yes, I want to change or I want to make improvements. What's the first step for them to do?
Stop blaming the other person. Look in the mirror. That's the guy that needs to fix. I don't care what she's doing. I don't care how horrible she is. I don't care. You work on you. Because the reality is marriage is like a two-legged stool, and if one leg moves, the thing has to move with it. First step is to look on you. What do you need to do? Where do you need to get stronger? Are you showing up in your life as the strongest, best version of yourself? Are you showing up in a way that will attract her, that will inspire her, that will lead her? Or are you just kind of drifting and flopping and not really applying yourself? Like, look, guys, we have a couple different basic strengths. And the first thing I do with the guy is we go through those strengths. And there's an assessment program I take guys through, and we look at, there's physical strength. That's the one that everyone thinks when I say strength. That's probably not actually the most important one. There's financial strength. There's emotional strength. There's sexual strength. There's intellectual strength. And all these different things, I break them out into about 30 different subcategories. And we go through and we say, where is it you're not showing up? Because wherever you're not showing up, you're adding to the problem. And there's a special thing about being a guy. Like when you go dancing, I love swing dancing. My wife and I go swing dancing. And when the guy's in the lead, right, you've got your hands up and you raise your right hand in the air to indicate you want her to spin. And assume you have a good relationship and she doesn't hate your guts at that moment. She does a beautiful spin, right? There's this leading component, and baked into the idea of being the male and the thing. I'm not trying to be some sort of patriarchal thing here. There's just, in essence, it's my job to fix myself first. She may fix herself, she may not. But we, as guys, we don't worry about what the women are doing. We fix ourselves and we get stronger.
So that 30-point assessment that you were talking about, do you kind of just look at it as from like the strengths, weaknesses, or opportunities, threats, almost like a SWOT analysis where you're kind of seeing what specifically areas do I need to address in those?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so it's a numerical system. You end up with a score between 0 to 100 for each of these different almost 30 areas. And the whole value of this system is you'll immediately be able to say, oh my goodness, I am really having troubles with lust. For example, you can get a really low score in the lust category if you're currently having an affair. Turns out that's not great for staying married. And so like if you have that particular score, time to take some action there. Like this seems like a low ball. But here's another great one that guys really tend to undervalue. How emotionally solid are you? Can you stand there when your wife is angry and yelling and saying things that aren't true and hold your calm? Because that's an essence of what a woman needs from a man to be able to feel loved. Because she's going to say stuff sometimes that she doesn't mean. And can you stand there through and sit in that fire with her? There's a whole strength category just for emotional solidity, which isn't something guys normally think about. And I don't have time to go into all of them, but each one breaks some different facet of your relationship down into something that she needs to be able to feel safe and secure in that marriage.
So once you identify the areas that do need to be addressed, then what's next? Do you kind of prioritize them, put a plan together, and then how do you measure that someone is making improvements in those specific areas?
Absolutely. So the first thing we have to do is we have to get really crystal clear on what's going on. Most of the time, Mark, it's what we're thinking. We have some really, really bad perceptions. All of us, all human beings, love to blame the other person, and so we get stuck in the blame cycle in our own head. Well, it's because she does this. It's because she does this. It's because the kids do this, whatever. So we first thing, we unearth these thoughts, and we start to pull these thoughts out and replace them with thoughts that make us stronger. And we say, it doesn't matter what she does. I'm going to hold on to myself because of who I want to be. Then we start doing into the practice. And the reality is you've got X number of decades of practice being the guy you've always been. So if you want to be a new guy, get some different. You don't take a guy who's never been in the gym and throw him in there and the first time load up a barbell with 500 pounds and say, lift that barbell up. All he's going to do is hurt himself. So you have to work through what's a first practice you can do. Maybe if you want to work on this emotional solid parameter I'm talking about, maybe what you do is you just practice at work where it's a much safer environment, much less. How can you practice holding your emotional core at work? We talk about what does that mean, what would that look like? But then how do you measure progress? Because progress is so important. If you can't measure, it's really hard to stay motivated. And the measurement has got to come from yourself in this case. A lot of times, wives don't respond right away when we're making progress. They don't know what's going on. They want to be sure it's going to last. So we look at it and we make metrics. The emotional solidness is a great one. You can say, how many times did you lose it this week? Was it 10? How about next week? Maybe it's 8. Okay, maybe next week is 7. Maybe next week is 8. Okay, we had a setback. No big deal. Get back on the horse. Maybe the next week is 6. Get some data. Look at how is that data going and use that to motivate yourself to stay on this path. Is
the spouse or wife in this case involved at all in this, or is this all happening kind of behind the scenes?
I think it's important to know that any time one person of a marriage is doing something, the spouse is at least indirectly involved. However, my work is solely with them. And my claim to you, this may be a bold claim, is that if the husband is willing to clean up his act and really step up his game, his wife will respond. I have countless stories of people who are separated, and he says, it's time for me to clean up. He does. and he re-attracts her back into a relationship. Because women marry us men for a reason. Like, let's be honest, none of us men really deserve our wives. If we're really humble and truthful about this, my wife got a bum deal. She kind of knows it. I know it for sure, right? And so they chose us for something. That's something that's hopefully still there. And if we clean ourselves up, get our lives back in order, stop doing the stupid stuff we know we shouldn't be doing, they tend to respond.
And what are some of the best ways to open the communications with your spouse?
Humility. So here's the deal, Mark. In every interaction with your spouse, you have at least some blame. So maybe she is bat poop crazy and she's doing all this stuff. It doesn't matter. There's something in that interaction that you could have done better. And so the way you open up communication is, honey, this interaction went poorly. I don't like how it went. I did this thing wrong and I'm sorry. Stop right there. And that's so critical. We're just taking ownership of what we did wrong. It never helps to point the blame finger. And don't fall in the trap if she's asking, well, what's the list of stuff I did wrong? No. That's not there. We don't go down that path. We, as men, work on ourselves. She has her own journey. The journey of a woman is different than the journey of a man. When I work with clients, when I train them, is we start with humility. We start with an apology for what it is we do wrong.
So you mentioned that a lot of these habits are ingrained over years and years. So you're going through how you work and the training, and it sounds very simple, very straightforward, but I'm sure it can be very, very challenging when someone's got some of these habits built for years and years and years. How often do you meet with someone, talk to them? Are they constantly trying to improve, and how do they take those baby steps to get there?
Absolutely. I'm meeting weekly with them directly, face-to-face, usually by Zoom, and we're communicating by email in between those times as well. And it does take time. If we have time, maybe I can share a quick story from my own life about how powerful, though, the perspective can be. So my wife is she calls herself a burster. She lets an idea and bursts into the idea and thinks it's the greatest idea of all time. Well, about a year ago, she wanted to get a border collie puppy, and we have 6 kids that are all very little. And I knew in my core being, it was a bad idea to get a high-energy dog that's very high in maintenance, right? And I didn't stand up for myself. I didn't really say it. I waffled, and I said, okay, fine, honey, go ahead, get this dog. Well, it was a train wreck. And so sure enough, it all goes poorly until one day when, just due to no one's fault, the dog, who was a tire chaser, managed to catch a tire and unfortunately passed. It was a guest driving into our property. He was going 5 miles an hour. And it was totally the dog's fault. The next day, my wife says to me, golly, I never knew how much lower stress I have now. I can't believe how much stress this dog was causing me. Well, fast forward in time, about a month later, and she has a new bursty idea. And I immediately know again that it's something bad. So how I react poorly. Last time I reacted too soft. So this time I pivot the other way. That's a horrible idea. How could you possibly think you could do such a thing? Blah, 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 blah. I get all worked up. So I'm talking to my coach for this incident. And he says to me, you know, Michael, you'd want to claim that you don't trust her. That's what your whole argument is right now, is you can't trust your wife because she makes bad decisions. But the reality is, Michael, you don't trust yourself because you knew the right thing to make the call with poor Daisy Dog. And you didn't stand up and do what you knew was right. And so because you didn't trust yourself, when she does whatever she's doing, she's an independent human being. She gets to be her own self. When she does whatever she does, you overreact because deep down you're afraid you don't trust yourself. And that doubt is what's triggering this external overreaction. And the realization of that was like, oh, dude, you're so right. These can be these moments that just totally redefine how we interact with and consider our partners.
Let's look at that example, right? The first one, you kind of reacted to it, then you overreacted to it. How would you handle the third time that your wife comes up with an idea?
Well, it's so funny you mentioned that because actually about a month after that, she came up with that she wanted to start a 3D printer business. It's a long story. She wanted to build puzzles and stuff. And again, I knew that wasn't the right thing. And so this time, I did a better job of it. So here's what I did. She's with the kids, and she says, okay, honey, I want you to open your heart. I've got this new idea. And internally, I'm like, okay, brace yourself. Stand tall. We know what's about to come here. This is not the first time my wife has a spontaneous new idea. She's ideation is off the chart for her, which is awesome. And she says her idea. And I say, honey, I love you. I don't think this is a good idea for us right now at this moment in our family. And she starts getting upset. I say, look, honey, I have a lot of good reasons. But because right now some of them aren't appropriate to share with who's around, I'm happy to talk with you at a different time. But the answer is no. She gets more upset. And I just held there. And I said, honey, I love you. I'm not mad. I'm not going to get mad. But the answer is no. We're not going to commit to this 3D printer business. I'm happy to go into more details in a private setting, just the two of us. I've learned enough about her that if I delay that next meeting a little bit, it tends to go a little smoother. And this is just kind of, just being aware of how can I help the other person out. And so we did. And I said a number of things that were particularly because of the way that she wanted to involve the children. It just wasn't the right fit. And I said, I'm not saying no forever, but the answer is no for right now. And she calmed down. And the way my wife tends to work is once she's over the idea, she moves on. But I held on to the truth. I held on to myself. I was able to express love to her. And afterwards, she actually came up to me and said, oh, no, after the fact, I kind of see it would have been another Daisy Dog situation. That's our code word now, is whenever it is something there, I can gently say, like, oh, it's a Daisy Dog situation.
Have you gotten another dog since?
No, we haven't. We've been talking about that. Stay tuned. That may be coming up. But if we do, it won't be a Border Collie puppy. We're not doing the puppy thing again until the kids are a lot older.
Yeah. How does the engagement change, or does it change, when there's kids involved?
So let's talk a little bit of psychology here for a second. The male nervous system, to a large degree, is evolved for protecting oneself. So like as a dude, I kind of go through the world, and I see the world as a series of threats and opportunities relative to me. The female nervous system, you can make a very good argument that's not true. That's actually evolved for the mother-infant dyad, the combination of the two, because throughout all of history, it's basically fallen upon women to protect an infant, right? They bear the majority of the burden doing that. I'm not trying to make a statement of or anything about worth or value. This is just evolution I'm talking about here, the psychology of what we have right now. So because of that, her perception of the world is relative to that mother-infant dyad. And so the female nervous system views an attack on the children as an attack on the self. And so if you just internalize that, which sounds so crazy to the male brain, because that's just not how our brains work. But when you internalize that and you see it that way, it does change things radically. You'll see mama go to mama bear mode to defend her children way more sometimes than she even will defend herself. And so as a dad, you have to really walk a fine line between, you have to be a father. The child needs both a mother and a father is different. But you also have to temper your response to the children, both out of love for the children and out of love for your wife. And so, for example, one of the common consequences I give I've got a 11-year-old right now, and when she really does something wrong, I love to give her burpees as a consequence, okay? A burpee isn't just an exercise. You go down to the ground, you stand up, do a jump, and you do it again, right? So it's just a great way to burn off some steam. And there's two ways I can assign burpees to this child. Like, oh, I'm so mad, just go do 1,000,000 burpees, blah, 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 blah. Or I can hold on to myself and I say, oh, honey, I see that this has happened. We've talked about this before. Your consequence is next to more burpees. And he or she loses it. I'm trying to be vague here, obviously. Loses it, blah, 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 blah. And I can just hold myself and be like, no, this is the consequence. And you can be firm. You can be decisive. But that same emotional regulation, the ability to hold on to myself, that helps soften that mother's nervous system that's so sensitive to how that is perceived as a threat or not. Now, there are times that as a parent, you need to have firm boundaries and clear rules. And those are all great. And you will have disagreements with your spouse about those. That's okay, that happens. But the more that I can hold on to myself, the more that I de-escalate her safety mechanism. And if you want to see a woman run for the divorce courts, really trigger that safety. That one gets them going there quickly.
I got to institute the burpees in my household with
Oh, it's a brilliant consequence.
Do you ever start an engagement with someone and say, I don't think this is fixable, maybe divorce is the best option, or do you tempt or try to fix it, in any situation that's out there?
So I have not yet encountered that. I can imagine there would be scenarios if there were, say, abuse of children involved. Then I would be legally required to involve authorities, and that would be beyond the purview of the coaching, or even abuse of a person, like certain levels of abuse there as well. I have not yet encountered that situation, and so far, when I have engaged with an individual, if they are willing to show up and do the work, their wife has responded. I'm not saying their marriage is flawless. Marriage, even after we improve ourselves, is still a union between two very, very selfish people. That doesn't change. But you can always make that better. You can always draw back. And it is, like it or not, a basic element of the genders that, as in swing dancing, men have a little bit of a lead role they get to play.
Is it something that someone should always be trying to improve? Or, does someone graduate from the program and, you're good to go? And do they ever relapse and kind of need to come back and work on or focus on specific things again?
So my most successful clients, I've got several different levels of engagement. And the most successful clients, we engage very hard, often I'm say 3 months, really, really focused on intensity. And then we drop down to a much lower level. I'm going to pick on a guy, I'll call him Bob because it's not his real name. He and I worked very, very hard on some parts of his marriage. And Bob was a very achiever, very engineering type guy, very, very driven in his world. And he was totally disconnected from his emotional sense, wasn't able to hold himself emotionally with his wife. And that was causing all this marital friction. Well, we really did that hard work, and Bob dug deep. Now what Bob does is Bob attends a group coaching program I offer that's specifically for people who've been through work with me, and we check in. It's a much more affordable option. It's not as much direct one-on-one. But the other day, Bob comes in. He's like, okay, Michael, this thing happened. I think here's what's going on. I think here's what I should look at instead. And we open up and pull it through. And it's so encouraging because he now feels empowered to start troubleshooting the problems himself. And so there's always more work to be done. Like, I will be a very selfish human until I die. I don't see that changing. But we can get to where we become empowered enough to start doing it ourselves.
Do you see people push back on some of the, I'll call them corrective actions or steps that you're recommending? And then how do you get kind of past those blockages?
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, like if I jump in just for a moment into some more Christian theological terms here, I'm kind of asking you as a husband to die on your cross. I'm asking you to do everything you know you need to do to be a better man, to serve your wife, even if she doesn't respond at all. That's kind of a sucky request. Like, it's not like, so you do all the suffering and maybe she'll respond positively. And I think the biggest thing you've got to do is right up front is really, really get crystal clear on why you're doing this. And if you don't have a crystal clear why, with a strong enough why, you can push through anyhow. But a weak enough why, it does crumble. And so my number one thing, if a guy really is crumbling that, is we just go back to the why. And we've got to decide, is this why here? And Mark, if you really understand divorce and what it does to children, what it does to finances, what it does to both the couples, it's a nightmare. Talk to somebody who has kids and is divorced from their spouse and ask them how that works out for them.
Yeah. Have you ever seen this kind of improvement initiated by the wife and then the husband comes to you to try and take steps as well?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We've had several clients. In fact, my wife's also a life coach, and a number of my clients have been husbands of her clients, that she'll work with a gal. There'll be some improvement. The husband will notice the improvement and say, boy, actually, I kind of respect you doing that. How do I do some of that? She says, well, how about that? I know the guy to talk to. So yes, this absolutely does occur. And here's the deal. Marriage is a two-legged stool. If either leg moves, the marriage moves. Now, can women go first? Absolutely. But if I'm working on a guy, my advice is, my strongest encouragement is, don't wait for her to go first. You can get to choose to go first too. And
just going back to some of those areas that you work, I know not enough time to go through like the 30, but what are some of the high level areas that people should focus on?
So one that I think a lot of guys, especially when you get up there a little bit in age, people aren't focusing on is endocrine health. And endocrine health is something that your testosterone levels is your big one, but you have other hormonal tests. And I really encourage guys to go in there and get a full set of blood work done. A lot of insurance programs will cover this. And the reason why this is such an important health parameter is you cannot show up well if you have low testosterone, if you have other hormonal issues going on. Like, it just affects you in these subtle ways. Like, it just undercuts almost every aspect of your life. And so there's just like an awareness factor for something like that. Another great one is about dealing with anger. And how well have you learned to channel anger? Anger is an emotion. You're allowed to have emotions. But what do you do? How are you strong with able to handle, what do I do when I feel angry? And ideally, we'd like to avoid anger, but there's going to be anger. You're human. There will be anger. Another great one, I do talk about physical strength. And physical strength is important. And let me just expand upon this a little bit with another cute piece of female psychology. There is a female attraction to the male form, and that's valid. But there is a stronger female attraction to her community's perception of you. And so if her friends are saying, hey, look, Michael's looking pretty good there, that will even more strongly activate her attraction and desire for you. And so there's these other ways of looking at things where it's not necessarily just, do I have a ripped six-pack, whatnot, but am I striving so that she and her community are noticing this striving? And kind of pushing towards that. Another great one is what I call, in one of the intellectual category, is how much are you growing in your self-awareness of reading good books, of understanding your children? Are you reading parenting books? And when we become stronger, not that you have to have all the answers, but that you're striving to grow in, say, parenting, in how you manage your wife and how you manage your finances and how you manage your job. As you grow and read good books, maybe you listen to a great podcast just like this one, and you grow in those regards, then that also soothes her worries. It says, hey, my man is here. He's got a plan for the future. He's taken us somewhere. He's going to protect me. He's going to have the utilities, both physical strength, intellectual strength, emotional strength, all the strengths to be able to be there to protect me.
I know we talked a little bit about how this is collaborated or communicated between husband and wife, but do they ever actually not just communicate what I'm doing, but actually show these are the 30 areas, this is where I'm weak, this is where I've improved since last week, and really go into detail on how they're trying to improve?
Generally not. But one of the reasons why I discourage that a little bit is the way that men talk about these is very different than the way that women perceive these. This is just, again, another of those great facts of biology where I can talk to you about why it is so important that you hold on to your calmness while your wife is saying whatever she needs to say. And as a guy, I'm going to describe that to you differently than the way I would describe it to a wife. So there is absolutely some feedback there. In fact, actually, the other day, I just got this amazing piece of feedback. I was talking to a client of mine. His wife walks by, and as she's walking by, goes, "You're doing great work. I like it. Keep it up," and keeps on going by. It was cute. He laughed. I laughed. And so there is absolutely some feedback there and some discussion that goes on there. But to a certain extent, another one of my crazy claims that people might be a little surprised by is I'm actually under the opinion that a lot of women don't even know what they want in a marriage. Like they have this feelings and this set of feelings. And lots of times I think men get frustrated when their wives will say, "Well, I think I would be more happy in our marriage if you did the dishes every night." And they say, "Okay, fine, I'll do the dishes." Well, he does the dishes and she doesn't feel any better. And all of a sudden he's like, "Well, come on, what gives? You told me to do the dishes, I do the dishes. Well, this doesn't make any sense here." Because a lot of times women don't know what it is they want. The psychology is very complicated, and it's no different from men. If I ask a man to really break down why he's attracted to certain parts of the female body, he'd be like, they look good. That's really as far as most of our brains can take it. To really understand the biology behind why those attraction patterns exist, why that draw and the connection are there, is pretty complex.
All right, Michael, we're just about out of time. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. You provided some really great actionable advice for men looking to rekindle, reignite their relationships, or just searching for better ways to be a better partner. For the listeners that want to learn more about your coaching, what's the best way to reach you, find out more about what you do?
So if you type in Catholic Life Coach for Men, I work with anyone who's Christian. You can find my podcast, Catholic Life Coach for Men, my website, catholiclifecoachformen.com. Come check it out. And if you are interested in learning more directly, I offer a free 1 hour of my life to anyone who wants to sign up for it. We talk about what's going on in your life and maybe how can I help and what do you need to change.
Great. We'll link to all that in the show notes. Thanks again, Michael, and thank you to everyone who tuned in to today's episode. Don't forget to follow the Agent of Wealth on the platform you listen from and leave us a review of the show. We're currently accepting new clients, and if you'd like to schedule a one-on-one consultation with our advisors, please do so at bautisfinancial.com/call.
Thank you for listening to the Agent of Wealth podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Bautis Financial. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial planning and investment advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investments and financial planning.